All right, we might hit one of those lights again. That might give us a little bit more. Can you do that, Fernando? Helen, thanks. The one on the other side. Thanks. Okay. So our last topic for this unit is to look at the nerves of the upper limb. We've looked at bones, we've looked at joints, we've looked at muscles and blood vessels. And so here we are on the fifth component of this portion of our human body that we call the upper limb. And found this great picture online that really shows you things cut away. Here's the shoulder. You can see the deltoid and trapezius. And you can see nerves coursing through this shoulder area and down into the upper limb. This set of nerves is known as the Brachial Plexus. And you can see that that's the title of your handout. Shoulder injuries, can cause problems all the way down through the arm, through the entire upper limb because of these important nerves. Of course, these are nerves that are ultimately coming from the spinal cord, and they run all the way down through, and all of our links with our brain and our body are through these nerves. Now, in this area here, this cervical area, you can see all the nerves are coming out of there. There are two plexi here. And I'd ask you to remember when we studied the lower limb. Remember we had two plexi. There was a lumbar plexus and a sacral plexus. Remember, a plexus is a weaving. The term literally means weaving in Latin. And the nerves come out from the spinal cord, they weave together, and then they reform into other kinds of nerves. The two plexi are first the cervical plexus, which is the superior one here, right from the very, very first spinal nerve down through the fifth spinal nerve here. We aren't going to do much with the cervical plexus. It does attached to the trapezius muscle in its upper portion, but other than that, it doesn't have much to do with the upper limb. But I want you to know it's there. We are going to revisit it in our next unit when we're talking about the torso, because there is at least one very, very important nerve that we're going to make a point about in this cervical plexus. Where we want to spend most of our time here, though, is with the brachial plexus. You have reading pages that show you where you can go to see these pictures that I'm using. This is in chapter 12, I believe, is the spinal cord and all the spinal nerves, and you can find these there. Now, the brachial plexus, you can see, comes from spinal nerves C5 through T1. Okay? These are known as the roots of the brachial plexus. Right? And so it would be these 5 spinal nerves. These are the ones coming straight out of the spinal cord, right out of the vertebra. And then they form this weaving. And the weaving you see here is the brachial plexus. Now, in some classes, if this was more advanced, we would go through the trunks here and all the various divisions here to know those. I'm going to make this a little simpler and take you out to the next area that I want you to know, which are called cords, and they are the orange parts of the picture. There are 3 cords here. So what I want to say is all of this weaving takes place, but it ultimately results in 3 cord structures. And then if you look closely, you'll see each cord then divides itself into 2 very dominant nerves. You're going to have to learn some of the names of the nerves here. And if you can start by learning these main nerves that develop from these 3 cords, you're in really good shape. So we've got roots here that weave into 3 cords. The 3 cords then each produce 2 nerves, and you can see the nerve structures here. Ultimately, what happens, though, is I don't wind up with 6 nerves. You would think 3 cords, each dividing into 2 segments, would give me 6 nerves. I'm only going to wind up with 5. Pardon me. As you see right here, 1 branch from this cord and 1 branch from this cord then unite to form a single nerve. A single nerve. Now, the cords here are known as the posterior cord, which is this one here, the lateral cord here, and the medial cord here. Now, these almost don't look like they should be lateral and medial cords, though. If I was looking at this picture and I was describing these two, how do you think you might describe them? They look more like they're superior and inferior, don't they? So let me just picture this better for you. Pretend my 3 fingers here, my 2 fingers and my thumb, are these 3 cords. This is how they sit in my shoulder. You see where my thumb is? My thumb is behind the other 2, isn't it? And you can kind of see it between the other 2. They've kind of, in the picture, they've kind of done like this. But when you see it straight on, it looks more like this. This is the posterior cord because it's laying behind. These 2 cords right here are like this as they come into the shoulder. But watch what they do. As the nerves from them come out, do you see where they go? Where do they go? This one up here that I might have said was superior is going to wind up being lateral, and this one is going to be medial. So the branches, the nerves that come from this are going to go to the medial side of my arm. The branches here are going to go out to the lateral side of my arm. So I call these 3 cords lateral cord and medial cord, and then this is the posterior cord. Now the nerves that come out from here, okay, I'm going to name from the posterior cord, I'm going to name 2 nerves. This is the radial nerve and the axillary nerve. From my lateral cord here, I'm going to get the musculocutaneous nerve. And then 1 branch is going to unite with a branch from the medial cord, forming the median nerve. And then the other branch from this medial cord is going to give me the ulnar nerve. Now, if you look at your handout, let's look at the top of your handout. This is what you see, right? You might want to, as we're doing this, you might want to have your pink muscle sheet handy too, because it's got all those nerves listed as well. In one sense, I could have just said, there's the nerves in your muscle list, study them, know them, look at a couple of pictures here. A lot of what I'm doing with this yellow handout here is trying to demonstrate for you how does a student, when they're faced with a whole bunch of information to learn, how does a student take that information and put it into a sort of common sense format that will make it easier for me to study. I'm doing this for you now. I'm showing you what I did to try to make this easy to study. One of the things you should be doing for yourself is learning how to do this yourself. Watch somebody do it, and then think about how you might do this in the future. Not every instructor is going to hand you so much on a silver platter. Is going to do all of this organizing work for you. One of the things you must learn to do as a student is learn, how do I take if somebody throws me a bunch of data, how do I take that and make sense out of it and put it in a format that's easy to study? And so that's what I've tried to do here. So basically, I listed this initial part here. There are these 5 roots of the brachial plexus, C5 to T1. Produces these 3 cords, right? And then I listed here the 5 nerves. So you can see each nerve, the posterior cord gives me these 2, the lateral cord gives me these, the medial cord gives me this. So, and this isn't necessarily 50-50, but the idea that the median nerve is formed by both the lateral and the medial cord. Right? And you do have to be very careful, don't you, here, between this word and this word, right? When somebody's supposed to write, when I point to this nerve right here, and somebody's supposed to write median, what's the most common mistake? Medial, right? The word medial and median have totally different meanings, right? Something that is medial is where? Closer to the midline of the body, right? It's more towards the center. Median, though, is in the middle of something. Now, you have to know what that something is in a sense. But you can see between these two cords here, producing these nerves, this is the one in the middle, isn't it? This is the one running down the center between all of this that you see right here. So this is the median nerve. And one letter can mark your answer wrong. Don't use the word medial when you should be using the word median. Okay? And just a simple way to remember this. A memory jog is just the numbers 535, right? I know there's 5 chords, or 5 roots, 3 chords, and 5 nerves that I should know here. Now all of this sort of sets me up now to learn which nerves are connected to which muscles. Which nerves connect to which muscles. And the key here is to first take the nerves that you see here and to take on the upper limb portion. Remember, we have shoulder, brachium, antebrachium, hand. We can take care of all of the muscles in the brachium and the antebrachium here with these nerves right here. And that's what we want to do. Let's look down your list now. The next thing you see on your list are the nerves that come right from the cords. Okay, the nerves that come from the cords. And there are the 5 nerves that you should know by name. Now, only 4 of them make their way down into the brachium and the antebrachium. It's these 4. In fact, you should probably put a bracket around it, right? Just draw a little bracket around these 4. These are the 4 that innervate all the muscles in the brachium and the antebrachium. And the patterns are very strong. Remember in the lower limb, how we were able to put muscles into big groups and run a single nerve into a group. And it was easy to remember all the muscles in that group having a single nerve. That's what's going to happen here. We're going to look at the nerves one at a time. Let's look at these 4 nerves and see what's the pattern. See, one of the things I've done as a student, I'm given all this data, what I look for is patterns, things that are going to help me remember. Okay? The first nerve that I want us to look at is the radial nerve. Now you have this picture in your handout, and this shows you and names all of the various muscles. They just show little pieces of all the muscles, but they show you all the various muscles that are connected to the radial nerve. One of the other things that I think is fascinating here, you don't have to memorize it, but you probably want to look at it a little bit, is these pictures down here show you the sensory patterns for the nerve. Remember, every nerve is bundles of neurons, bundles of little wires. Some of them are carrying sensory data from your skin back to your brain for interpretation. And some of the neurons are carrying traffic, carrying signals out to the muscles to tell them when to contract, cause them to move. They're kind of like nerves are like big freeways with lanes of traffic in both directions. You have dedicated lanes going one direction and dedicated lanes going the other direction. And they're just all bundled together into what we call a nerve. Now, when I look at all of these names here, I don't know if you can read them from there. They're a little small. But they all have something in common. Right? When I look up here, I see long head, medial head, lateral head of triceps. I see anconeus. Where are those muscles found? Where do I find my triceps muscle, my anconeus, all parts of that? Where? Posterior of the brachium, right? Yes, all posterior brachial muscles, which is really only two. Okay, now I look down here, I see extensor, digitorum, digiti minimi, ulnaris, indicis, extensor, supinator. Where do I find all these muscles? Where do I find all my extensors? Posterior, right? The posterior part of all my antebrachial muscles. Okay? So you've got to love this nerve, right? All posterior muscles in your limb, in the limb itself. Every posterior muscle belongs to the radial nerve. I remember that one fact and that one fact only. Now you say to me, what nerve goes to extensor digiti minimi? What nerve goes to extensor carpi ulnaris? I don't know. Okay? But I know that it's in the posterior side of the limb, and the one fact I know is every posterior muscle is radial nerve. See how much time you save studying? You don't study through the list trying to memorize every single muscle and which nerve it goes to. You memorize one fact, and then you reason to the answer that I'm looking for. Tell me the name of the nerve that goes to this muscle. All posterior muscles belong to the radial nerve. And you know what? Here's patterning in the body. Do you remember that? Every posterior muscle in my thigh and my leg was one nerve. Anybody remember it? One nerve took both deep and posterior or superficial compartments. Huh? Not sciatic. It was part of the sciatic. Tibial, right? The tibial nerve was every posterior muscle here and one nerve for all posterior muscles here. My body is built in patterns. Okay? That's why there's variety. There isn't an exact blueprint. Your genetic code is a pattern to build things in certain ways, but it leaves lots of room for variety too. So, radial nerve here is really, really good. Yeah, I've got a lot of work done. There's 9 muscles in the antebrachium and 2 muscles, 11 muscles on one nerve. One of the little things to just keep reviewing is the fact that the supinators and pronators. Supinator is always on the extensor side. Pronators are always on the flexor side. Okay, so now I've got all the back done. Now I've got 3 nerves for the anterior side of my limb. So how do these work? Let's look at a nerve called musculocutaneous. There's a mouthful. Okay? But not that many muscles here. Biceps brachii, brachialis, coracobrachialis. What am I seeing here? What little link, what little constant do I see here? Brachii, right? Brachii. And that's what this area is. So I took care of the posterior side. The anterior side of my brachium is musculocutaneous nerve. You kind of remember this, right? So all the muscles that say brachii, you remember this by doing this, right? Make a muscle. If somebody says make a muscle, what do? Right? Right. This is the make a muscle area, right? And muscle is in the name of the nerve. It's the only nerve that says muscle in its name. So that ought to trigger, oh yeah, it's the muscles right here. Now, of course, the brachii part, you wouldn't include like triceps brachii because that's back here. But leaving that out, you've got a real link here. There is, though, one exception that we have to point out. I'm a much better student if I look for my patterns and I see these dominant patterns, and I just have to remember that there's an exception or two. Like in the lower limb, remember there were 2 exceptions. Right? The pectineus was in the wrong compartment for what its nerve should be, and the short head of the biceps femoris was in the wrong compartment. But other than those two, everything else was in a nice, neat pattern. What's the one muscle that should be here that isn't? Brachio, right? Another brachii name, brachioradialis. Brachioradialis. Now, it isn't up in this area, it's down here. But I did mention to you that the brachioradialis of the forearm is the odd muscle. For one, 99% of the muscles in the forearm here reach down into the hand, and they either work your wrist, your fingers, or your thumb. They're either carpi, pollicis, or digitorum type muscles. This one never does. Brachioradialis goes all the way down to the wrist and then stops. Styloid process of the radius. Comes from the brachium up here. The only joint it crosses is the cubital, and that makes it a flexor, just like the biceps and the brachialis. These are all flexors. So it really should be here. Brachioradialis should be here, but it's not. You see, it's with the radial nerve. See it there in a box? See the box I drew around it? Okay, that was to point out that it's different than all the other. It's the one exception. So otherwise, I looked for the term brachii, and I put that with the musculocutaneous nerve. Okay? So, muscles in this brachial area here. All right, let's look at now two nerves that are in the anterior side of the forearm. One nerve in the back, one nerve here. That leaves two nerves for the forearm. Ulnar nerve and median nerve. Now, of those two, which one am I going to learn first? I'm going to learn the ulnar nerve. Now, let me show you why. First thing I'd want to know, and this will make this very easy, is could you name all of the muscles in the anterior side of the forearm? Does anybody know how many muscles there are here in the anterior forearm? Any guesses? How much? 10? 18? No? Say it? 8. Exactly. There's 6 in the flexor compartment, and there's 2 pronators. Right? There's 8. Now, one of the ways you remember this, okay, muscles in the anterior forearm. Remember 3, 2, 1 plus 2 pronators. 3, 2, 1. There's 3 that work the wrist. There's 2 that work the fingers. And there's 1 that works the thumb. That's at least in our list. So you've got here you should be able to go flexor carpi, radialis, flexor carpi. Come on. Flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris. The one in the middle is palmaris longus, right? And they don't reach fingers or thumb. They are wrist flexors. They do this. Then I have 2 digitorums. Flexor digitorum, not longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, and thus flexor digitorum profundus, right? There's my 2. I got my 3 carpes, my 2 digitorums, and I just need to know 1 thumb flexor. Flexor pollicis longus is the only one there. And then there's 2 pronators. Do you know the 2 pronators? Pronator teres and pronator quadratus, right? There's a rectangular muscle here near the wrist that's the pronator quadratus. Now, if you know those muscles, if you could name all 8 of those just right off the top of your head, you now have a very, very easy task of working out the division of the ulnar nerve and the median nerve, right? If I was going to give any one muscle to the ulnar nerve, what nerve would I give it? If I was going to give any one of these 8 muscles to the ulnar nerve, which muscle would it be? Flexor, carpi, ulnaris, of course, right? It's only one distinct muscle that attaches to the ulnar nerve. Only one distinct muscle here, and that is flexor carpi ulnaris. Now, having said that, you will see here that there is a second partial muscle. Second partial muscle is flexor digitorum profundus. Flexor digitorum profundus is notable because it goes all the way out to your fingertips. And it gives you this little sort of grip strength. Or if you were a cat, that's your claw strength, right? Your claws are right out there from your flexor digitorum profundus. Okay? So it runs all the way out to the fingertips here. It's such a big muscle that it takes both median and ulnar. So I remember that the ulnar nerve is a part of that muscle, but it's this one whole flexor carpi ulnaris. Now, with that understood, everything else belongs to the median nerve. Isn't that simpler? Right? I memorized this one set of facts right here, these two things right here, and then I give everything else to median. I don't have to memorize the nerve for flexor carpi radialis. I don't have to memorize the nerve for pronator teres. I don't have to memorize the nerve for flexor pollicis longus. If you say flexor carpi ulnaris, I say ulnar nerve. If you say flexor digitorum, I say both median and ulnar. And otherwise, everything else is median nerve. Okay? And so there's the median nerve. All muscles, you could say for median nerve then, all muscles except flexor carpi ulnaris, because it does also contribute to flexor digitorum profundus. Now, once you understand the pattern of those four nerves, the patterns here, you've then got every muscle taken care of in the brachium and the antebrachium. It's all done. Now, you are still left with the shoulder. You've got to still deal with the shoulder, and that's what the latter part of your handout is. So once you get that done, then you come down here to this latter part. And these are basically the muscles in and around the shoulder. Now, just before I go there, though, I kind of forgot to put this. I should have put another slide in here. We still should deal with the axillary nerve. If you look back from here to your list, right? And we dealt with 4 of the 5 nerves from the 3 cords. The posterior cord gave me that radial nerve, but it also gave me a little nerve called axillary. If you look at your handout right there where the axillary nerve is, it shows you the deltoid and the teres minor. And we just need to make a little sort of confession here. No matter how well you organize everything, or how many patterns you find, every once in a while you run into something that's just kind of like a brick wall. And for me, the axillary nerve is that. I don't know any reason to link the teres minor with the deltoid muscle. And neither of them is down in the armpit, which is what axillary says. So, deltoid and teres minor, they don't have an origin in common, they don't have an insertion in common, they don't have a function in common, they don't have anything in common except for their nerve. And neither of them is really in the axilla, in the armpit area. They kind of cover it, they're outside it, they're in that general location. So sometimes you just have to just kind of work it. You just got to memorize it. But as a student, if I can make most of my work easy through patterns, it gives me the freedom and the time then to focus on the things that are weird or difficult. Okay, and that's what you want to be able to do as a student. Right? You want to get as much pattern, as much of that kind of arrangement as you can, and just leave yourself then what you need to do for the tougher parts here. Okay, so you're just going to have to work the axillary nerve, but the other 4 work very nicely. Now here in the shoulder, here again is what I would do as a student. I've got 4, 6, 7, 8. I've got 9 nerves I still need to learn. These come out from various parts of the brachial plexus. I've got all of these muscles that I still need to work out. Who's attached to what? So, as a student, here's what I do. I first pick this group of 4 right here. Now, you tell me, okay, look at this group, and you tell me, why did I pull out these 4 nerves and these muscles? This is what I'm going to study first. Why did I do that? What is the link here? Why did I pick these out of all 9? What? What matches? Okay, the nerve name matches the muscle name, right? These are the 4 where the names match very nicely. A subclavius muscle has a subclavian nerve. A pectoralis muscle has a pectoral nerve. A subscapularis muscle has a subscapular nerve. I always pick out the easiest stuff first. Do you have that in your mind, that you always you find and attack the easiest stuff first when you study? You know what this does for you? There's a whole strategy here. This is one of the keys to me getting good grades. When I began to learn to approach a test in this way, I would make sure I studied the easy stuff. I would work up my review sheet. I would get more and more stuff. I would learn stuff, but I'd learn the easy stuff. Often, you can find lots more easy stuff than there are hard stuff. And if you can separate them out, you can learn the easy stuff. And I don't care what test it was, I would always come down to the day or the night before the test, and I would have some stuff that was really tough. Some parts of it that for one reason or another just didn't stick in my mind well. And so what would I do? Well, I would take all of that stuff that I haven't quite learned yet, and I would bring it in. I would have reviewed everything else so much that I was so confident about, say, 80% of what I was doing. And there was still this one little part that was tough. And I would come down to the night before, the morning before, and I would cram. Okay? But I'd worked it down to where the tough stuff I needed to learn was small enough that I could cram it. What happens with a lot of students that don't understand this is they're trying to cram everything the night before, and then they can't handle it, and they can't and they lose the whole thing. If you get enough reviewed over and over again that you get confident, that you feel really good about that, and you know what you're not confident about, then here's what you do. You study, you cram it that morning, you go in, breathe deeply, relax. Don't be studying up to the last second. You know, I see some of you, I'm bringing the answer sheets around, and you're still studying away. Then, here, hand me the answer sheet. Okay. Right? And you've got all this stress. You know, cram it, relax for a moment, breathe deeply. They would hand me the test, and what's the first thing I would do? I would begin to write down everything I had crammed. I wouldn't start looking at the questions. I would just write down all of those bits of information that were still in my brain. The notes, if you will, the short set of notes that I could fit into my brain right before the test. I would write that all down. Then I would breathe. Then I take that deep breath. Because now I know I've got all of this stuff reviewed so well that I know it really well. And now all that little cram stuff is written right down here where I can read it. I didn't bring any notes into the test. I brought notes in here and I quickly wrote them down. And now I have everything I need to do very, very well on the test. And it works great. It does. But it takes all of that. You've got to review. You've got to feel confident about the 90% so that you can work that last 10% in and just edge up to the much better grade. Okay? So, Find, like I did here, find the easy stuff first. I'm going to memorize this group first because the names match. And if I've got 9 nerves, I just took care of half my work almost right here. Just picking out those 4. Right? That's what I did here. So this all works. Now there is a ringer here. Why is this teres major with the subscapular nerve? I don't know. So that's just another little grunt thing you got to do. You also have to look carefully here. 2 pectoral nerves, 2 pectoral muscles. How do I distinguish who gets what? I can think of a reason in my mind, right? I see pectoralis major twice, right? So my rule here is the big muscle gets both nerves, right? It's so big, it somehow has to have both nerves to make it work, right? The pectoralis minor only shows up one. It only needs one of the 2 nerves. What's my link here? Probably the letter M, right? Right? I'm not the lateral nerve. The medial part, pectoral, is going to go with the minor, right? So if this gets 1 and this gets 2, they both, and the minor will remind me it's the medial one that gets pectoralis minor. Okay? So I'm just about halfway done with that. Okay? So remember, these pectoral muscles, you see pectoralis major and the minor, and they get 2 nerves there. Okay, now the next little group. Okay, so now I pull out these, right? And the key right here is probably the term scapular. Okay, after I get the ones that have the same names, now I'm going to look at the scapular nerves. So I'm going to take dorsal scapular, suprascapular, and I see a pattern here too. Have you learned these 3 muscles? I hope you did for the test today. Right? You remember them right here? Right? These were the first 3 muscles on your muscle list, weren't they? Levator scapula, rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. They're all in the same place. They all originate on the vertebra. They all insert onto the superior angle down the vertebral border here. They all kind of fit together as a group. Well, they do. They all have one nerve. We call it the dorsal scapular nerve. Dorsal refers to this back area, right? The back of me is dorsal. So they all fit together. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus sounds like they're sisters, right? So they're going to go together. They get a suprascapular nerve. Be careful you don't say supraspinous nerve, right? Suprascapular. So then I learned this little group right here. Take my time. I want to work it into my review list. I want to learn it, go over it so many times that I can put it on my review list. And I think the next thing I would do is then kind of just jump back for a second, and I'd probably put the 3 scapular nerves together and give them one more look. Right? Because I took care of this scapular because these 2 names were identical. Right? But now just stop for a second and say, okay, I'm going to remember that there are 3 scapular nerves, subscapular, dorsal scapular, suprascapular, and I can get almost all of this. This teres major still is kind of the ringer here, but otherwise I got all these muscles in the shoulder that cluster around and are working with muscles associated with the scapula. Okay. So, sort of in 3 steps here. First step, names were the same. Second step, focus on the scapula. Third step, last step here, 3 nerves, 3 muscles. Okay? Fairly simple. Thoracodorsal latissimus dorsi. The big latissimus dorsi muscle here has one big nerve for itself. Probably the dorsal name here is going to link here for latissimus dorsi, right? It's the only muscle with the word dorsi in the name of the muscle. Long thoracic, serratus anterior. I don't know how you would do this, but for some reason, I don't know when and where or how it got into my brain, but when I hear long thoracic, I just think a long way down. I think, here's my thorax, and I think long way down. And I know serratus anterior grabs many ribs, doesn't it? How many ribs? 1 through 8, right? 8 whole ribs. So I just have this mental picture. If I picture the serratus anterior fingers here, I just think, boy, they go a long way down the thoracic cavity, right? And that's the name of my nerve, long thoracic. And then finally, trapezius. It's a big trapezius muscle. I told you cervical plexus is involved there. It isn't actually listed in your muscle sheet, but it's there. The key muscle or the key nerve here is called the accessory. And the last thing we need to do is just stop and make a point about the accessory nerve. Okay? The accessory nerve. Notice it's printed with a Roman numeral. This is different. This makes it special. Anybody know that Roman numeral? What number is it? 11. If you've never had Roman numerals before, somehow you missed that in elementary school or wherever, an X is a 10, an I is a 1, a V is a 5, right? And when they're printed side by side, if the smaller ones are to the right, they add. If the smaller ones are to the left, they subtract. So if I add an X with an I on this side, it would be a 9, 10 minus 1. In this case, it's 10 plus 1, right? And what that Roman numeral tells me is this. This nerve is a cranial nerve. Now here's the distinction. You'll remember I've given you just a little bit of talk about the nervous system. I have a brain and a spinal cord. Every nerve in my human body comes out of my brain or my spinal cord. Thus far in this class, every nerve that we have described is a spinal nerve. All of the lumbar plexus, all of the sacral plexus, all of the cervical plexus, all of the brachial plexus, these all derive from spinal nerves. When we get to our head and neck unit, we're going to study bones, joints, muscles, blood vessels, and nerves. And the nerves associated with the head are cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs. You will know all their names. You will know what they do. You'll have to know everything about the cranial nerves, the 12 pairs. Each one is numbered. So you'll see the Roman numerals 1 through 12 associated with them. So that's always a key to you. Nerve number 11, its name is the accessory nerve. Now, how do I link that to the trapezius muscle? What is there about that I know about trapezius that will help me remember, oh yeah, the cranial nerve? It's what? Right. It's the only muscle that originates partly on the skull, right? Skull being the home for the brain giving us the cranial nerves. So, you will need to remember that one nerve. Put the cervical plexus in there too, if you would. I didn't quite have room on your pink sheet to put that in, but that should be there as well. Okay? So this is where you kind of finish. You know, if you get all the rest of that, if you can get all the patterns done the night before, maybe you're just cramming these 3, and you can fit those in for 15, 20 minutes, and then write them down on your answer sheet and go for it. And this class, you're in good shape, right? Because you can write all over your test. You can write as much as you want. As long as it comes out of your brain, we're good. Okay. Any last questions then on these nerves?